Caleb Ward had never hit a man in a suit before, but when he saw those manicured fingers close around the woman's wrist hard enough to leave marks, 35 years of restraint went silent, and something older woke up. In 2 seconds, he crossed the cafe. In 3, the rich man was pinned against the wall, coffee cups rattling, the whole room frozen. Caleb didn't shout. He never shouts. That's what made it terrifying. What he didn't know, what nobody in that cafe knew, was that the quiet woman he'd just saved could have bought the entire town with a single phone call. Before we go on, do me a favor, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe a good man's worth isn't measured by his bank account, hit subscribe and stay with me to the end. The bell over the door of the Blue Kettle Cafe rang at 6:42 that morning, same as it had every morning for the past 4 years. And Caleb Ward walked in with grease already under his fingernails and his daughter's cold hand tucked inside his. 2 hot chocolates and a black coffee, Lily announced to the whole room, holding up 2 fingers like a little general. 1 hot chocolate, Caleb corrected quietly. You already had breakfast. But Marge makes the good kind. Marge makes the expensive kind. Behind the counter, Marge laughed a big weathered laugh that had been welcoming truckers and mechanics for 30 years. 1 hot chocolate on the house because it's Tuesday, and I like her better than I like you, Caleb. Everybody likes her better than me. That's the whole town's opinion. He said it flat, but there was a crack of a smile under it, and Lily beamed up at him with a gap where her front tooth used to be. She was 8 years old and small for her age, with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she was without any competition the only reason Caleb Ward still bothered getting up in the morning. He steered her to the corner booth, the one by the window, the one he always took because it let him see the door. Old habit. You could take the man out of the Navy, but you couldn't teach him to sit with his back to a room. Not after everything. Daddy, are we rich? Caleb set the hot chocolate down in front of her. Where'd that come from? Tommy said his dad said we're poor because you fix cars. Tommy's dad talks too much. So are we. He looked at her for a moment. 8 years old, and already the world was trying to hand her its ugliest math. He wanted to lie. Fathers always want to lie about that one. But he'd promised himself the day her mother died that he'd never lie to this kid, not about anything that mattered. We're not rich, he said. But we've got a roof and we've got food and we've got each other. Some folks with a lot more than us don't have that last part. So I figure we're doing okay. Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Okay, she decided, and went back to her hot chocolate, and Caleb felt the small private victory of a man who'd made it through one more question without breaking. He was 35 years old, and he felt 60. 8 years of service had done that to his body, 2 bad knees, a shoulder that told him when it was going to rain, and a ringing in his left ear that never fully went away. But it was the last 4 years that had done it to his heart. 4 years since Sarah. Pancreatic cancer, they'd said. 3 months from the diagnosis to the funeral, and he'd spent every one of those days pretending to be strong for a 4-year-old who kept asking when Mommy was coming home from the hospital. He didn't believe in miracles anymore. He'd prayed for one hard on his knees in a hospital chapel at 2 a.m, and it hadn't come. So he'd made a decision right there in that chapel, no more waiting on the sky to fix things. From now on, he'd fix what he could with his own 2 hands. Engines, drains, the leaky roof, the little girl's broken heart, and he'd stop expecting anything for free. Work, school, home. That was the shape of his life, and he'd made peace with it. Or told himself he had. Drink up, he said. Bus comes in 20 minutes. That was when the second bell rang. Caleb saw her before she saw anyone. Old habit again, he clocked every person who came through that door, sized them up in half a second, filed them away. Threat. No threat. She was a no threat. A woman maybe a few years younger than him, dark hair pulled back, plain a gray coat that was nicer than anything anyone in this town wore, but not so nice you'd notice unless you were the kind of man who noticed things. She had the posture of someone trying very hard to take up as little space as possible. She ordered a tea, sat 2 booths down, Didn't look at her phone, didn't look at anyone, just wrapped both hands around the cup like she was cold from the inside. Caleb went back to his coffee. Not his business. It became his business. 4 minutes later, when the door slammed open hard enough to make the bell scream, and a man in a charcoal suit walked in like he owned the deed to the sunrise, Caleb knew the type before the man said a word. He'd met 100 of them in 100 ports, the ones who'd never been told no, who moved through the world, certain that the world would rearrange itself to suit them. Expensive shoes. Watch worth more than Caleb's truck. A face that had probably been handsome once before the money got into it. The man walked straight to the woman's booth and slid in across from her without asking. "Vivian." He said the name like an accusation. "You have any idea how many people I had looking for you?" The woman Vivian went very still. "Dorian, you need to leave." "I flew 3,000 miles. Nobody asked you to." Caleb kept his eyes on his coffee. This was the part where a smart man minded his own business. He had a daughter 3 feet away. He had a life built entirely around not making waves. Whatever was happening at that booth was somebody else's storm. "Daddy," Lily whispered. "That man is being mean. Drink your hot chocolate, baby." "But I know." He did know. He could hear it in the woman's voice, that particular flatness people get when they're scared and trying not to show it. He'd heard it before, in interrogation rooms, in the voices of civilians in villages where the wrong men had come through. It was the sound of someone who'd learned that showing fear only made it worse. "Come home," the man was saying. "This little vanishing act, it's cute, but it's over. The board is asking questions. Your mother is asking questions. You don't get to just, let go of my arm." Caleb's head came up. He hadn't seen the man grab her, but he saw it now. Those manicured fingers closed around her wrist, white-knuckled hard enough that the skin around them had gone pale. And he saw her face. She wasn't fighting. She'd gone somewhere far away behind her own eyes, the way people do when fighting has never once worked, when they've learned that the only thing left is to wait for it to be over. Marge had gone quiet behind the counter. 2 truckers in the far booth were suddenly very interested in their eggs. Nobody moved. That's how it always goes. A room full of decent people, and everyone waits for someone else to be the one. Caleb slid out of the booth. "Stay here," he told Lily. "Do not move. Understand me." Something in his voice, she nodded wide-eyed. He crossed the cafe slow. Not aggressive, calm. He'd learned a long time ago that the loudest thing in any room is a man who doesn't need to be loud. He stopped at the edge of the booth and stood there, and it took the man in the suit 3 full seconds to notice the shadow that had fallen over his table. "Can I help you?" Dorian said with the exact tone of a man swatting a fly. "You're hurting her." "Excuse me?" "Her wrist. You're hurting her. Let go." Dorian looked up, really looked for the first time, and Caleb watched him do the math that men like him always do. The cheap flannel, the work boots, the grease under the nails. And Caleb watched him get the math wrong the way men like him always do. "This is a private conversation, friend," Dorian said. "Why don't you go back to your—" He glanced at the table at the little girl, and something curled at the corner of his mouth. "Your family. Let go of her wrist. I'm not going to say it again." "Or what?" Dorian actually laughed. "You'll fix my carburetor." Caleb didn't laugh, didn't move, just held the man's eyes and let the silence do the work, and something in that silence must have finally reached the part of Dorian's brain that money hadn't rotted yet, because his grin flickered. "I've called men bigger than you before," Caleb said quietly. "In places you've never heard of. Some of them thought they were dangerous too. Let go of her wrist." For a second, one long second, nobody breathed. Then Dorian let go. He let go, and he stood straightening his jacket with the wounded dignity of a man pretending it was his idea. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said to Caleb, to the woman to the room. "Neither do you," Caleb said. Dorian's jaw worked. He looked at Vivian one more time, and there was something ugly in it, something possessive and cold. "This isn't over," he told her. "You can't hide in a place like this forever. Look around you. You don't belong here." He buttoned his jacket. "Neither of us does." And then he walked out and the bell rang, and through the window Caleb watched him climb into a black car that cost more than the Blue Kettle Cafe made in a year and drive away. The room let out its breath all at once. "Well," Marge said into the silence, "anybody want a refill on the house? My nerves need the company." Caleb turned to the woman. She was rubbing her wrist and her hands were shaking now that it was safe to shake. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up at him. And it was strange for a woman who'd just been that scared. There was something steady underneath it. Something that had learned to survive worse. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No." Caleb agreed. "I didn't." He could have been dangerous. So could I. That surprised a small laugh out of her, more breath than sound. "I suppose you could." She flexed her fingers, testing them. "Thank you. Really. Most people would have." "Most people did," Caleb said, not unkindly, glancing around at the room that was already going back to its coffee. "It's all right. Not their fight." "Was it yours?" He thought about that. "My daughter said you were being treated wrong. She's usually right about that kind of thing. Kids are." He glanced back at Lily, who was watching the whole exchange with her mouth slightly open and hot chocolate on her upper lip. "You want me to have Marge call somebody? The sheriff, that man?" "No." Quick. Too quick. Then softer. "No. Thank you. It's complicated, but he won't come back. Not today." "Vivian, right? That's what he called you." A pause. Something moved behind her eyes, some small hesitation he'd remember later when it all made sense. "Vivian," she said. "Vivian Hale." "Caleb Ward." He didn't offer his hand. Hers were still shaking. "That's Lily. She's the one who noticed you. I just do the heavy lifting." Vivian looked past him at the little girl, and her whole face changed, softened. "Hi, Lily." "Hi." Lily wiped her mouth on her sleeve. "Are you okay?" That man was really mean. He had a mean face. He did have a mean face. Vivian agreed seriously. "My daddy has a scary face, but he's not mean. He's just tired." Lily. "It's true. Marge said it. She said you're the tiredest man in the whole county." Marge from behind the counter. "I stand by that." And for the first time since the bell had screamed, Vivian Hale smiled, a real one, small and startled, like she'd forgotten she could. "Well," she said, "your daddy has a very brave face too. He just saved me from a mean man. That's a hero's face, I think." "He's not a hero," Lily said with the crushing honesty of an 8-year-old. "He's just my dad." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the fight. "The bus," he said, checking the clock. "Lily, grab your bag. We gotta move." The next few minutes were the ordinary chaos of getting a child out the door. The backpack, the forgotten mitten, the reminder about the field trip form, the kiss on the top of the head that Lily was starting to be embarrassed about in public but still allowed. Caleb walked her to the corner, waited until the yellow bus swallowed her up, watched her small face in the window until it turned the corner. He did this every single morning. He never once didn't. When he came back inside to grab his coffee to go, Vivian Hale was still there. "You have kind eyes," she said, "for a man with a scary face." "Don't tell anybody. Ruins my reputation." "I won't." She stood, gathering her coat. Composed now. Whatever had shaken loose in her when Dorian grabbed her wrist, she'd packed it neatly away again. "I meant what I said. Thank you, Caleb Ward. You didn't know me, and you stood up for me anyway. That's—" She stopped, and for just a second the composure cracked, and he saw something raw underneath it, something lonely. "That's rarer than you'd think." "Where I come from," he said, "it's just what you do." "Where do you come from?" "Right here. Grew up 2 roads over, left for a while, came back." He shrugged. "Not much of a story." "I doubt that," she said, and then she was gone out into the gray morning, and Caleb stood there with his cooling coffee and the strange, uneasy feeling of a man who'd just done something that mattered, without understanding why. He shook it off. He had a transmission to rebuild, and a leaking radiator, and a customer coming in at 9 who never paid on time. He didn't have room in his life for strange women in nice coats and the men who chased them. He got in his truck. He went to work. He didn't think about her again, or that's what he told himself. The truth was more complicated the way the truth usually is. Ward and Son Auto had a sign that hadn't been repainted since Caleb's father put it up in 1994. The son part referred to Caleb. His old man was 10 years dead, and Caleb had never bothered to change it because some mornings when the light hit it right, it felt like his father was still standing in the doorway, wiping his hands on a red rag, telling him he'd left the impact wrench out again. He worked alone. He liked it that way. Engines didn't lie to you. Engines didn't die on you at 41. You put in the work, you did it right, and the thing ran simple, honest, fixable. There was a peace in it that he'd never found anywhere else, not in 12 countries, and not in any church. That afternoon, he was under a '09 Silverado with a bad wheel bearing when he heard the little bell over the shop door. "Be right with you," he called, sliding out on the creeper. Vivian Hale was standing in his garage. She'd changed clothes, jeans, now a plain sweater, and she looked younger and less like a woman being hunted. But it was her, and Caleb sat up so fast he cracked his head on the bumper. "You all right?" she asked. "Fine." He wasn't fine. He saw stars. He climbed to his feet, wiping his hands on the rag, doing exactly what his father used to do without realizing it. "You lost?" "No." "Car trouble?" "No." "Then—" He stopped, recalibrated. He wasn't good at this. He hadn't been good at it even before Sarah. After Sarah, he'd stopped trying entirely. "Then what can I do for you, Miss Hale? I wanted to make sure you were the kind of man I thought you were," she said. "This morning, it could have been a fluke, a good moment from an average man." She looked around the garage at the neat rows of tools, each in its place, at the swept floor, at the photo of a little girl taped to the toolbox. "But it's not, is it? You're the same man in here that you were in there. I don't know what kind of man you thought I was. The kind who does the right thing when it costs him something." She tilted her head. "You have a daughter, a business, a whole quiet life, and you put all of it between a stranger and a dangerous man without a half-second's thought. Do you know how few people do that?" Caleb shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of being seen. "You keep saying he's dangerous. Who is he?" Something closed in her face. "Someone from my old life." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He should have pushed. Later, he'd wish he had. But there was something in the way she stood there, both feet planted, chin up, refusing to explain, and refusing to apologize for it, that reminded him of someone. It took him a moment to realize who. It reminded him of himself. "You want a coffee?" he heard himself say. "It's terrible. It's been on the burner since 6, but it's coffee." Vivian Hale smiled that small, startled smile again. "I'd love a terrible coffee," she said. And that was how it started. Not with fireworks. Not with fate announcing itself. Just a broken warrior and a woman with secrets drinking burnt coffee in a garage that still had another man's name on the door, both of them pretending they weren't as lonely as they were. Yeah, she came back the next day. And the day after. Never the same time. Never announced. He'd hear the bell and look up, and she'd be there leaning in the doorway with 2 coffees from the blue kettle, the good kind, not his sludge, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You know," Marge told him when he came in for Lily's Tuesday hot chocolate, "that woman's been asking about you." "What woman?" "Don't play stupid." "Caleb, it doesn't suit you. Miss Hale. Sits right there in the corner and asks me questions. What kind of man you are. Whether you've got a temper. Whether you drink." Marge slid the hot chocolate across. "I told her the truth. Told her you're the most decent, most miserable son of a gun I know, and that your late wife was the luckiest woman in 3 counties right up until she wasn't. Marge, I also told her you haven't smiled a real smile since the funeral." Marge looked at him hard. "Except she says you smiled twice at her, so." Caleb didn't have anything to say to that. The thing was, Vivian didn't ask him for anything. That was what disarmed him. Everybody wanted something. Customers wanted their cars fixed cheap. The school wanted forms. The bank wanted its payment. Even the well-meaning church ladies who still dropped off casseroles 4 years too late wanted the small, warm feeling of having helped the poor widower. Vivian just wanted to sit in the doorway and talk. She asked about the Navy, and he told her more than he'd told anyone, not the classified parts, but the human parts. The buddy he'd lost in a training accident before they ever saw combat. The way you could be more homesick for a person than a place. She asked about Lily, and he lit up in a way he didn't notice, but she did. She asked about Sarah, and he went quiet, and she didn't push, and that not pushing told him more about her than anything she could have said. He asked about her too. He wasn't stupid, but every road led to a wall. Where are you from? East Coast. What do you do? I'm between things. That man, Dorian. What's the story there? Someone I used to trust. Walls. Neat, polite, immovable walls. And a smarter man, a less lonely man, would have walked away from a woman who wouldn't tell him a single true thing about herself. But Caleb Ward was not a smart man about this. He was a lonely one. And the thing about being lonely for 4 years is that when someone finally sits with you in the quiet and doesn't flinch at your silences, you stop asking what's behind the walls. You're just grateful they came. The first time Lily saw her at the shop, it was a Friday, and Caleb had picked her up early from school because she'd complained of a stomachache that was 90% a math test. Vivian. Lily dropped her backpack and ran, and Caleb felt his heart lurch because Lily didn't run to people. Not since Sarah. Lily had built her own small walls, and she guarded them harder than her father guarded his. "Hey, you," Vivian said, catching her. "How's the bravest girl in the county? I have a stomachache." "That's terrible. Is it the real kind or the math test kind?" Lily froze, looked up, betrayed. "How did you know?" "Because I was 8 once too, and I invented the math test stomachache." Vivian crouched down to her level. "Here's a secret. It gets better. You just have to survive being 8 and being 12, and then you're free. Promise. Promise." Caleb watched his daughter, his careful, guarded, wounded daughter, lean into this woman she'd known for 2 weeks, and he felt two things at exactly the same time. He felt happy, and he felt afraid. Because he knew standing in the doorway of his father's garage with a rag in his hand that if this woman with all her secrets and all her walls ever walked away, she wouldn't just take a piece of him. She'd take a piece of Lily too. And Caleb Ward had spent 4 years making sure nothing would ever hurt his daughter again. He'd failed to protect her from cancer. He'd be damned if he'd fail again. "Lily," he said, "go wash the shop grime off before you touch anything. Hands all the way up." "But..." "Now please." Lily went grumbling, and Vivian stood and brushed off her knees and caught the look on his face. "You're worried," she said. "It wasn't a question. She likes you." "I like her. That's the problem." Caleb set the rag down carefully. He was not a man who talked about feelings. The words came out of him like teeth being pulled. "Miss Hale. Vivian. I don't do this. I haven't done this in 4 years, and I'm not sure I'm doing it now. But I need you to understand something about that little girl. She's already lost the most important person in her life. She was 4. She still sleeps with the light on. She still sets 3 places at the table sometimes and pretends she didn't." His voice caught, and he hated it, and he pushed through. "So I can't let her get attached to somebody who's just passing through. Somebody with a whole other life she won't tell me a thing about. I can't do that to her. Do you understand?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "You're not really talking about Lily," she said gently. "Excuse me. You're afraid for you too." The words landed harder than he wanted them to. He opened his mouth to deny it and couldn't. That was the trouble with her. She saw straight through the flannel and the grease and the scary face to the tired, frightened man underneath the one who'd been white-knuckling his way through 4 years of grief and pretending it was strength. "I lost my wife. he said finally quietly. "I built a life where nothing can do that to me again. Small, simple, predictable. And it's not much, but it's mine, and it's safe, and my daughter is safe in it." He met her eyes. "And then you walked into my cafe with a rich man's fingerprints on your wrist, and a life you won't explain, and I can feel it, Vivian. I can feel the whole thing I built starting to—" He stopped. "You're not safe. I don't know what you are, but you're not safe." He expected her to argue, to make promises. Instead, Vivian Hale looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, something like grief, and something like guilt, and something like a woman standing at the edge of a confession she wasn't ready to make. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not safe. And there are things about me you don't know, things I should tell you." She took a breath. "There's a version of this where I walk out that door right now and I never come back, and I let you keep your small, safe life exactly the way it is. It would probably be the kind thing to do." She looked toward the back of the shop, where the water was running, where Lily was singing to herself the way she only did when she was happy. "But I haven't wanted to stay somewhere in a very long time, Caleb. And I want to stay here, with you two. And I think you want that too, even though it scares you to death." Caleb didn't answer, couldn't. "So I'm going to make you a deal," Vivian said. "Let me stay. Not forever. I'm not asking for forever. Nobody gets to promise that you of all people know it. Just let me stay a while. Let me be part of this. And I promise you, when the time is right, I will tell you everything. Every last thing. And then you can decide whether you still want me here. Fair." "That's not fair at all," Caleb said. "That's you asking me to trust you with my daughter's hard-on credit." "Yes," Vivian said. "It is." She held his gaze. "But you already stood up for me once when you had no reason to. You looked at a stranger and decided she was worth the risk. All I'm asking is that you do it one more time." From the back of the shop, Lily's voice. "Daddy, there's no more paper towels." Caleb closed his eyes. 4 years of walls. 4 years of small and safe and predictable. 4 years of a life so carefully constructed that nothing could ever get in to hurt them, and nothing ever did, and nothing ever would. And God, he was so tired of it. He was so tired of being the tiredest man in the county. He was so tired of setting 2 places at the table and pretending he didn't miss a third. "Use the shop rag," he called back. "The red one. It's greasy." "Then use your shirt, kid, I don't care." A pause. Then a delighted little shriek of a laugh because he never let her use her shirt, and the wrongness of it was thrilling to an 8-year-old. And Caleb heard that laugh, and he looked at the woman standing in his father's garage, asking him for something he didn't know if he had left to give. "A while," he said finally. "Not forever. A while." Vivian Hale let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "A while," she agreed. "And when it's time you tell me everything. All of it. No more walls." "All of it," she promised. "No more walls." He didn't believe her. Not completely. Some part of him, the part the Navy had trained and grief had sharpened, knew that a woman who wouldn't tell you where she was from, or what she did, or who was chasing her, was a woman carrying something too heavy to put down easy. That the something, when it finally landed, was going to land hard. But Lily came skittering out of the back with grease on her shirt and triumph on her face, and she looked between the 2 adults with the uncanny radar of a child who could feel the weather in a room change. "Are you staying for dinner?" she asked Vivian. "Daddy's making spaghetti. It's the only thing he makes." "That's not true," Caleb said. "I also make grilled cheese." "Grilled cheese isn't dinner, it's a snack that's lying." Vivian laughed, the full laugh. Now the one that had nothing startled about it, and something in Caleb Ward that had been clenched tight for 4 long years, loosened just slightly, just enough to feel the danger of it. "I would love," Vivian said, "to stay for lying spaghetti." And so she stayed. She stayed for spaghetti that night, and she stayed for the walk afterward, when the 3 of them went down to the river because Lily wanted to show Vivian the good skipping stones. She stayed while Caleb showed his daughter for the 100th time how to angle her wrist and she stayed while Lily failed for the 100th time and threw the rock straight into the water with an indignant splash. She stayed while the sun went down over a small town that had never given Caleb Ward anything but ordinary days, and for the first time in 4 years, an ordinary day felt like a gift instead of a sentence. Walking back, Lily reached up and took Vivian's hand without thinking about it the way children do, and Vivian looked down at that small hand in hers with an expression that Caleb, watching, couldn't quite name. He'd understand it later. It was the look of a woman who had everything money could buy and had just realized she'd found the one thing it couldn't. "Careful!" A voice in the back of his head warned him, his father's voice, or maybe his own. "You don't know what she is." But the river was pretty, and his daughter was laughing, and the woman with kind, sad, secret eyes was holding her hand, and Caleb Ward, broken warrior, tired widower, decent, miserable son of a gun, let himself have it. Just for a while. He should have asked more questions. He knew that even then. He was a man who checked the door out of habit, who never sat with his back to a room, who'd learned in the hardest possible ways that the things you don't see coming are the things that take the most from you. But some part of him had decided, standing in that garage, that he was done being careful. That maybe a man who'd already lost everything didn't have anything left to protect but the shape of his own loneliness, and that shape wasn't worth protecting anymore. So he didn't ask. He walked his daughter and a billionaire home along a small-town river as the light dyed gold over the water, and he didn't ask a single one of the questions that would have changed everything. And he was, for a few hours, something he hadn't been in 4 years. He was happy. He had no idea what it was going to cost him. The while that Vivian had asked for stretched into weeks, and the weeks did something to Caleb Ward that he didn't have the vocabulary for. He noticed it first in small things. He started whistling in the shop, which he hadn't done since before Sarah, and the first time he caught himself doing it, he stopped so fast it was almost violent, like he'd been caught stealing. He started leaving the porch light off at night because the house didn't feel as dark anymore. He caught himself one Wednesday buying 2 kinds of ice cream at the grocery store instead of 1, and he stood in that frozen aisle with a carton in each hand for a full minute before he understood why. Because Vivian liked mint, and Lily liked chocolate, and somewhere along the way, his brain had started stocking a house for 3. He put the mint back, then he took it out again. Then he cursed under his breath and bought them both. "You're different," Marge told him one morning, sliding his coffee across the counter. "You know that. Different how? You looked at the door when you came in, to see if she was here." "I look at every door. Old habit." Marge had the maddening patience of a woman who'd watched 3 generations of this town fall in and out of love across her counter. "You know she asks me about you still. But it's different now, too. She doesn't ask if you're a good man anymore. She figured that out." Marge leaned in. "Now she asks whether you'd forgive somebody, if they did something, if they kept something from you." Caleb went still. "She said that. She said that. What did you tell her?" Marge looked at him for a long moment. "I told her the truth. I told her you're the most stubborn, most loyal man I know, and that those 2 things live real close together in a person. That you'd walk through fire for somebody you loved." She paused. "And that you'd walk away from them just as fast if you decided they'd lied to you. Because to a man like you, a lie isn't a lie. It's proof the whole thing was fake." She slid the coffee closer. "I don't know what your Miss Hale is carrying, Caleb, but I hope for both your sakes she puts it down soft." Caleb didn't touch the coffee for a long time. He should have thought harder about that. He knew it later. But that afternoon, Lily had a school play, and Vivian showed up with flowers for an 8-year-old who had exactly 4 lines as a talking vegetable. And the way Lily's face broke open when she saw those flowers pushed every one of Marge's warnings clean out of his head. "You came," Lily whispered backstage in her green construction paper costume. "Of course I came," Vivian said, kneeling down. "You're the most important pea in the whole play." "I'm a pea pod. The most important pea pod, then. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." And she wouldn't have. That was the thing Caleb kept snagging on. Whatever else was true about Vivian Hale, whatever she was hiding, the way she looked at his daughter wasn't a lie. You couldn't fake that. He'd spent enough years learning to read faces in bad places to know the real thing when it stood in front of him in a school gymnasium holding a bouquet too nice for the occasion. He watched Lily deliver all 4 of her lines at full volume to the exact spot in the audience where Vivian was sitting, and he watched Vivian mouth every word along with her like she'd memorized them. And Caleb Ward sat in a metal folding chair in a room that smelled like floor wax and felt his 4-year-old walls come down another inch. Afterward, they got ice cream, and Lily got chocolate, and Vivian got mint, and Caleb got nothing because he said he didn't want any, and then ate half of both of theirs. And Lily laughed so hard she got the hiccups, and a woman 2 tables over smiled at them the way people smile at a family. A family. That's what they looked like. Caleb saw the woman think it, and instead of correcting it in his own head the way he would have a month ago, he let it sit there. He let himself feel it. That was his mistake, letting himself feel it. Because the higher you let yourself climb, the farther there is to fall, and Caleb Ward should have known that better than any man alive. The first crack came on a Tuesday. He was under a car when his phone buzzed on the workbench, and he ignored it because he always ignored it, but it buzzed again and again, insistent. And finally he slid out and wiped his hands and looked at the screen. 3 missed calls, all from a number he didn't recognize. A 212 area code, New York. He almost didn't answer when it rang a 4th time. Later, he'd wish he hadn't. But he did. Ward Auto. Is this Caleb Ward? A woman's voice. Crisp. Professional. The kind of voice that had never once had to ask for anything twice. Who's asking? My name is Eleanor. I'm calling on behalf of the Hartwell family. I understand you've been spending time with a woman who introduced herself to you as Vivian Hale. Caleb's whole body went quiet the way it used to go quiet before something bad. I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Ward, please. We're aware of the situation. I'm not calling to cause trouble. I'm calling to help you avoid it. A pause, delicate, rehearsed. The woman you know as Vivian Hale is not who she's told you she is. And the people looking for her are not people you want to be standing next to when they find her. For your own sake and for your daughter's, I'd strongly advise you to end the relationship, quietly, before it becomes complicated. Who are you? A friend. Consider this a courtesy. And the line went dead. Caleb stood in his father's garage with the phone in his hand, and his heart doing something slow and heavy in his chest. And the first thing he felt before the fear, before the anger, was a terrible sinking recognition. Because he'd known. Some part of him had known all along. The walls, the 212 number, the rich man in the charcoal suit who'd flown 3,000 miles, the way she never told him a single true thing. The woman you know as Vivian Hale is not who she's told you she is. He didn't say anything to her that night. He wanted to. He nearly did 3 times, but every time he opened his mouth, Lily was there. Lily who was showing Vivian how to fold paper cranes. Lily who fell asleep against Vivian's shoulder on the couch. Lily who Vivian carried up to bed like she'd been doing it her whole life. And Caleb watched a woman who might be a stranger tuck his daughter in and turn on the nightlight without being told, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't blow up the only good thing they'd had in 4 years on the word of a crisp voice from New York. So he waited. He was good at waiting. The Navy had taught him that. You don't move until you have the whole picture. You don't fire until you know the target. He got the picture 9 days later, and it nearly killed him. It was a Thursday, gray and cold, and Vivian had promised to pick Lily up from school because Caleb had a transmission job that was running long. It was the first time he'd ever let anyone but himself pick her up. That was how far the walls had come down. He'd handed her the single most sacred trust in his life. The yellow bus, the school door, the small girl in the world, and he'd done it without a second thought. At 2:40, his phone rang. Vivian. Hey, he said, wrench still in his hand. You get her. Caleb. Her voice was wrong, tight. There are men here, at the school, 2 of them. They've been following me since this morning. I thought I lost them, but they're here, and I don't want Lily anywhere near this. A breath. I need you to come. Right now. I have her. She's safe. She's right here. But you need to come get her, and I need you to know. The voice cracked. I need you to know I would never let anything happen to her. Never. You have to believe that. Caleb was already moving. Wrenched down keys up out the door. Where are you? The library, across from the school. We're inside. Caleb, 10 minutes. Stay inside. Stay where there's people. He was in the truck now, engine roaring. Vivian, look at me. Are you looking at me? I'm looking at you. Is my daughter safe right now this second? Yes, I swear to God, yes. She's reading a book about horses and she has no idea anything's wrong. Then keep it that way. I'm coming. He made it in 7. The men were gone by the time he got there. Vivian had done exactly right, gone somewhere public, and whoever they weren't the kind to make a scene in a library full of witnesses. But Caleb found her in the back corner of the children's section, and she was standing between the door and his daughter, like a wall of her own, and Lily was on the floor with a book about horses, oblivious, happy, safe. Daddy? Lily scrambled up. Vivian took me to the library. We're gonna get a horse book. That's great, baby. He crouched, checked her over with his eyes the way he checked everything top to bottom, no damage. You okay? You have fun? Vivian knows everything about horses. I bet she does. He stood, looked at Vivian over his daughter's head, and his face was calm, his scary calm, the cafe calm, but his eyes weren't. Lily, go pick out 2 books, the good ones. Take your time. Lily went. And the second she was out of earshot, Caleb's voice dropped to something low and terrible. Who were they? Caleb. 2 men followed you to my daughter's school. My daughter's school, Vivian. Who were they? She closed her eyes. And when she opened them, something had changed in her face, some final wall, the last one coming down, not because she'd chosen it, but because it had been knocked flat. Not here, she said. Please, not in front of her. Take her home. Get her fed. Get her to bed. And then I'll come, and I'll tell you everything. All of it. No more walls. I promised you that, and I'm keeping it. But not here, and not now, not with those men still. She stopped, steadied. Tonight, I swear to you, tonight you'll know everything. Caleb looked at her for a long, long moment. If you run, he said quietly, if you're not there tonight, I will spend the rest of my life being glad I never told my daughter your real name. Do you understand me? Vivian flinched like he'd hit her. I'll be there, she whispered. I'm not going to run. I'm done running. That's the whole problem, Caleb. I'm so tired of running. He took Lily home. He made spaghetti because it was the only thing his hands knew how to do, while the rest of him was somewhere else entirely. He listened to his daughter narrate the entire plot of the horse book through a mouthful of noodles, and he said, "Wow." And no kidding, in all the right places. And inside, he was a man standing on a beach watching a wave come in that was bigger than the town. He put her to bed, turned on the nightlight, sat on the edge of her mattress the way he did every night. Daddy? Yeah, baby. Is Vivian gonna be my new mom? The question went through him like a nail. Where'd that come from? Tommy said you don't just get ice cream with a lady unless she's gonna be your wife, and Vivian tucks me in like Mommy used to. And she remembers my whole schedule, and she came to my play. Lily said it all in the practical cataloging way of a child building a case. So is she? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I don't know, Lil. Do you want her to be? And Caleb Ward, who never lied to his daughter, opened his mouth to give her some safe adult non-answer and found he couldn't. Yeah, he admitted barely above a whisper. Yeah, I think I do. Then it's easy, Lily said, already half asleep. You just have to be brave. Like you were at the cafe. You told me being brave is doing the scary thing anyway. Her eyes drifted shut. So do the scary thing anyway. He sat there a long time after she fell asleep. Then he went downstairs to wait for the truth to arrive. Vivian came at 9. She didn't knock so much as stand on the porch until he opened the door, And when he did, she looked like a different woman. The composure was gone. The walls were gone. What was left was just tired and scared, and about to jump off something high. "Can I come in?" He stepped back. Let her in. Didn't offer coffee. They stood in his small living room, with Lily's paper cranes strung across the mantel, and Sarah's photograph still on the wall, and Caleb crossed his arms and said, "Talk." "My name isn't Hale." She said it fast, like ripping tape off skin. "That's my mother's maiden name. I used it because I needed to be nobody for a while, and Hale was as close to nobody as I could get." She took a breath. "My name is Vivian Hartwell." She said it like the name should mean something. And Caleb searched himself and found that it did a whisper of it from magazine covers at the grocery checkout, from the news. He half watched from a world so far from his that it might as well have been the moon. "Hartwell," he repeated slowly. As in, Hartwell Industries, Hartwell Capital, the Hartwell Foundation. Her voice was flat, reciting a sentence a life. "My grandfather built it. My father ran it. And when he died 2 years ago, he left controlling interest to me. Not my brother. Not the board. Me." She looked at him, and there was something almost pleading in it, some desperate need to be understood, before he decided to hate her. "I'm what those magazines call one of the most powerful women in the country, Caleb. I'm worth—" She stopped, like the number was obscene in this small, warm room. "More than this whole town will earn in 10 lifetimes. That's who I am. That's what I've been hiding. That's what those men were, and the woman who called you and Dorian at the cafe. They're all pieces of a life I ran away from, and I brought that life to your daughter's school today, and I will never forgive myself for that as long as I live." The room was very quiet. Caleb didn't move, didn't uncross his arms. His face had gone somewhere Vivian couldn't follow, somewhere behind the scary calm, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so level it frightened her, worse than shouting would have. "A billionaire. Caleb, you're a billionaire." He said it again, testing it like a man pressing on a bruise to find out how deep it went. "You've been sitting in my garage drinking my terrible coffee. You've been eating my lying spaghetti. You bought my daughter flowers for a school play and mint ice cream, and you know her whole schedule." His voice caught, and he hated it, and he pushed through with something cold. "And the whole time, every single day, you were a billionaire, and I was a mechanic who didn't know he was being—" He stopped. "Being what?" Vivian said quietly. "Say it." "I don't know what this was to you." The cold cracked, and underneath it was something worse, something raw. "That's the thing, Vivian. That's the thing I can't get past. I don't know what any of it was. Was it real, or was it slumming? A vacation from your real life? A little cabin in the woods you could walk away from when you got bored?" "Don't." Her voice shook. "Don't you dare. Because I've got a friend from New York who says you people always get bored." He hadn't meant to say it. Eleanor's crisp voice. Dorian's ugly smile, all of it rising up in him at once. "She called me 9 days ago. Told me you weren't who you said you were, and I should get out before it got complicated. And I didn't listen because I'm a fool, because I let you—" His jaw worked. "I let you tuck my daughter in. I let her ask me tonight if you were going to be her new mom. I let her get attached to a woman who was lying to me every single day." Vivian went white. She asked that, "Don't." Now it was his voice shaking. "Don't you make this about how much you love her. Maybe you do. I actually think you might. But that just makes it worse. Vivian, don't you see that? Because now I have to tell an 8-year-old who's already lost one mother that the woman she picked to be her second one was never real. That her name was a lie. That she was just passing through. I wasn't passing through." The words tore out of her. "God. Caleb, that's the whole point. That's the entire reason I never told you. Do you have any idea what it's like to be me? To have people find out what you're worth and watch their whole face change. To never not once know if a single person in the room wants you, or wants the money. My whole life, Caleb. Dorian wanted the money. My so-called friends want the money. The men my mother pushes at me want the merger. And then I walk into a cafe in the middle of nowhere, and a broken-down mechanic with grease on his hands throws a man across a room for me, not for what I'm worth, because he had no idea what I'm worth. And it was the first time in my entire adult life that somebody saw a person and not a fortune. So we me. She was crying now, the composure gone to nothing. I didn't tell you because the second you knew it would be over. Exactly like this. Exactly like right now. And I couldn't. I couldn't stand to watch your face do what everyone's face does. So I took it. I took whatever I could get. I took the coffee and the spaghetti and the little girl who held my hand at the river, and I hoarded it because I knew it wouldn't last, and I wanted to be a person for just a little while before I had to go back to being a bank account. Caleb stood very still. "That's a beautiful speech," he said finally, and his quietness was the cruelest thing in the room. "But it doesn't change what you did. You lied. Every day. For weeks. You looked me in the eye, and you lied, and you let my daughter fall in love with a lie. And maybe your reasons were good. Maybe they were the best reasons in the world. But I built my whole life around one thing, Vivian. One thing. That my daughter would never again love somebody who wasn't going to be real. Who wasn't going to stay. And I let you in. I let you in because I trusted that whatever you were hiding, it wasn't that you were somebody else entirely. I'm not somebody else. I'm exactly who I've been. The name is different. The money is different. But the woman who ate your spaghetti is the same woman standing in front of you. The woman who ate my spaghetti isn't going to stay in a town like this." His voice was breaking apart now, all the cold gone. Just a man in ruins. "Be honest. For once be honest, all the way honest. You've got an empire, Vivian. A board. A mother. A whole world 3,000 miles from here. You're going to go back to it. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not this year. But you're going to go back because that's your life, and this." He gestured at the small room. The paper cranes, the whole modest shape of everything he had. This was never going to be enough for a woman who owns half the country. And when you go back, my daughter is going to stand at that window and wait for a woman who's never coming. And I am going to have to watch it, and I am not. His voice finally shattered. "I am not going to do that to her. I won't. I would rather break her heart clean tonight than watch you break it slow. You don't get to decide that for me." Vivian's tears were streaming now. "You don't get to decide I'll leave, and then leave me before I can prove you wrong. That's not protecting Lily Caleb. That's you protecting you. You're so scared of losing something again that you'll throw it away first, just so you're the one holding the knife." The words hit dead center because they were true, and both of them knew it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked. Somewhere upstairs, a small girl slept under a nightlight, dreaming about horses, with no idea that the two adults below her were tearing apart the best thing either of them had found in years. "I think you should go," Caleb said. "Caleb, I think you should go, Vivian, or Hartwell, or whoever the hell you are." He walked to the door, opened it. The cold night came in. "You said you'd tell me everything, and then I could decide whether I still wanted you here. Well, you told me, and I'm deciding." His hand was white-knuckled on the doorframe. "I don't want a life that comes with men following my daughter to school. I don't want a woman who lies to me for a month and calls it protecting my feelings. And I don't want to explain to Lily why the lady she loves has a different name than the one she gave her." He couldn't look at her. "Go back to your empire. It suits you better than my spaghetti ever could." Vivian stood in the middle of his small living room, and Caleb watched her gather herself. Watched the billionaire come back up over the woman like water rising, the composure returning piece by piece because it was the only armor she had. By the time she walked to the door, she was Vivian Hartwell again, chin up, spine straight, the most powerful woman in the country with tears drying on her face. She stopped in the doorway, close enough that he could smell the mint on her breath, the good coffee, everything he was about to lose. "You want to know the cruelest thing?" she said very softly. "For a few weeks I forgot I was rich. You made me forget. And it was the happiest I've been since I was a little girl, before my father sat me down and explained that everyone I'd ever meet would want something from me." She looked up at him. You didn't want anything from me, Caleb, and I fell in love with you for it. And now you're throwing me out for the one thing I couldn't help being." A tear slipped down. "You're the only man who ever loved me for nothing. And it turns out that wasn't enough either." She stepped out into the cold. "Tell Lily—" Her voice broke. She stopped, steadied it. "Don't tell Lily anything. It's easier if I'm just gone. Kids forget." "No," Caleb said, and it was the truest thing he'd said all night. "They don't. That's the whole tragedy of them, Vivian. They never forget anybody they loved." She walked to a car he hadn't noticed before. Black, expensive. A driver in the front seat, the whole apparatus of the life she'd hidden, sitting at his curb the entire time. And Caleb stood in his doorway and watched her get into it. Watched the door close. Watched the taillights pull away down the small dark street and turn the corner and disappear. Then he closed his own door. And he stood in the middle of his living room in the sudden enormous silence, and he did something he hadn't done since the hospital chapel 4 years ago. He put his face in his greasy hands and he wept. Upstairs, he didn't hear the small sound. He didn't hear the creak of the third stair, the one that always gave a child away. He didn't know that Lily had woken up thirsty and come halfway down, and heard just enough her father crying, the front door closing, an engine pulling away, to understand with the terrible clarity of a child exactly what had happened. Vivian was gone, and her daddy had made her go. Lily crept back up the stairs without a sound. She got into her bed. She turned to face the wall and she pulled the covers up to her chin, and she did not cry because she had learned something in 4 years that no 8-year-old should have to know, that when the grown-ups fall apart downstairs, the only job left for the child is to be quiet and small and not make it worse. But she lay awake a long time in the light of her nightlight staring at the wall, and in her small, fierce heart she made a decision. Her daddy was wrong. He'd told her once that being brave meant doing the scary thing anyway. He'd stood up in a cafe for a stranger because it was the right thing, even though it was scary. And now he'd sent away the person who made them both happy and called it protecting her. And Lily knew the way. Children always know the way. They see straight through every lie adults tell to keep the world small and safe, that it wasn't protecting anything. It was just running. And Lily Ward, 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, decided that if her daddy was too scared to be brave, then she would have to be brave enough for both of them. She just had to figure out how. Down the hall, Sarah's photograph watched from the wall, and the paper cranes turned slowly on their strings in the draft from the door that had just closed on the best thing to walk into that house in 4 long years. And the tiredest man in the county sat alone in the dark and grieved a woman he'd sent away himself. Too proud, too scared, and too badly broken to do the one thing his own daughter already knew how to do. Stay. The morning after came the way all the worst mornings do, ordinary. The alarm still went off at 5:40. The coffee still had to be made. The little girl still had to be fed and dressed and put on the bus, and the world did not stop or slow or acknowledge in any way that something in the Ward house had broken in the night. Caleb moved through it like a man under water. He made the eggs, he poured the juice, and Lily sat at the table and didn't say a word, and that was the first thing that told him she knew. "You feeling okay?" he asked. "Fine." "You want jelly on your toast?" No. She always wanted jelly on her toast. Caleb set the plate down and crouched next to her chair, and she wouldn't look at him. She just stared at her eggs, and something in his chest that was already broken cracked a little further. "Lily, look at me." She looked, and her brown eyes. Sarah's eyes were flat and careful, in a way that no 8-year-old's eyes should ever be, and Caleb knew the way he knew engines, the way he knew weather, that she had heard everything. "You sent her away," Lily said. Not a question. A verdict. Caleb didn't lie to his daughter. He'd promised himself that 4 years ago, and he wasn't going to start now, no matter how much easier the lie would have been. "Yeah," he said. "I did." Why? How do you explain it to a child? How do you explain money and lies and the way a man's pride can dress itself up as protection? How do you explain that you sent away the person you both loved because you were too afraid of losing her slow, so you lost her fast instead, and called it strength? It's complicated, baby. That's what grown-ups say when they did something bad and they don't want to say it. The words landed square. Caleb rocked back on his heels. Lily. She loved us. Lily's voice was very small and very steady. She came to my play. She knows my schedule. She held my hand at the river. And you sent her away, and now she's not coming back, and you didn't even ask me. Her chin was trembling, but she wasn't crying. She was doing the thing she'd learned to do, holding it in, being quiet, being small. You always say we're a team. You and me against everything. But you didn't ask me. You just made her leave. Baby, there are things you don't understand. I understand you're sad. Lily pushed her plate away. I understand you cried last night. I heard you. And I understand you were happy when Vivian was here, and now you're not, and neither am I, and you did it on purpose. She slid off her chair. I don't want toast. I don't want jelly. I want to go to school. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. An 8-year-old had laid out the entire moral architecture of what he'd done in 4 sentences, and then asked to go to school, and Caleb Ward, decorated veteran, the man who'd faced down armed men in 12 countries, had no defense against any of it. He drove her to the bus stop in silence. He watched her get on. She didn't wave. She always waved. He went to work and stared at a carburetor for 2 hours without touching it. The days that followed had a terrible sameness to them. Lily stopped narrating her horse books at dinner. She stopped asking for the good hot chocolate on Tuesdays. She did her homework and brushed her teeth and went to bed without being told. And it should have been every parent's dream, a compliant, quiet child. And instead, it was the worst thing Caleb had ever watched. Because he knew what it was. It was a little girl, folding herself back up into the small, careful shape she'd been in the year after her mother died. It was grief, learning its old roots through a child who'd already been mapped by it once. She'd stopped setting the third place at the table. That was how he knew it was bad. Back then, after Sarah, she used to set a place for her mother and pretend she didn't. Now after Vivian, she set 2 places. Just 2. Precise. Like she was making a point. Like she was showing him the exact size of the family he'd chosen when he closed that door. Marge cornered him on the 4th day. You look like hell. Thanks. She's gone then. She's gone. Marge poured his coffee without being asked. You know she came in here, the morning after, before she left town. Caleb's head came up sharp. Sat right in the corner, where she always sat. Ordered a tea she didn't drink, and she said to me, Marge, tell me the truth. Am I crazy? Was any of that real? And I said, honey, that man hasn't looked at a woman in 4 years, and he looked at you like you hung the moon. So no, you're not crazy. It was real. Marge leaned on the counter. And you know what she said? She said then, why does the truth about who I am make the real thing fake? Why can't a person be rich and still be real? Marge fixed him with a look. I didn't have an answer for her, Caleb. You got one. Caleb stared into his coffee. It's not about the money. No, then what's it about? She lied to me. Every day. So did you, Marge said. Caleb's head snapped up. You've been lying to that little girl for 4 years, telling her you're fine, telling her you're strong, telling her the reason you never let anybody in is because you're protecting her when the truth is you're just scared. That's a lie too, Caleb. It's the kind we forgive because it comes from love. So why's her lie so different from yours? Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. He left his coffee on the counter and walked out, and Marge let him go because she'd known him since he was a boy, and she knew there was no arguing with a Ward when his pride had its heels dug in. You just had to wait for the ground to shift under him. It always did eventually. The only question was how much it cost him first. The ground shifted 11 days later, and it came from a direction Caleb never saw coming. He was closing up the shop when a car pulled into the lot, not black, not expensive, just a rental sedan, gray and forgettable. A man got out, and Caleb's whole body went still because he knew that walk, that suit, that manicured certainty. It was Dorian Blake. Ward Autos closed. Caleb said flatly, "I'm not here for a car." Dorian smiled, and it was the same smile from the cafe, the one that made Caleb's hands want to close into fists. "I'm here to do you a favor, actually. One working man to another." He glanced around the garage with poorly hidden contempt. "Well, not quite one working man to another, but you understand. Say what you came to say and get off my property. She's back in New York. Did you know that, Vivian?" Dorian said the name like he owned it. Back at the office, back at the galas, back in the life. 2 weeks out here playing house with a mechanic, and the second it got hard, she went right back to where she belongs. He tilted his head. "You know that's her pattern, right? You're not the first. There was a ski instructor in Aspen, a painter in Lisbon, a firefighter, if you can believe it, some square-jawed nobody she found charming for a season. She does this. She gets bored with her world, goes slumming for a few weeks, finds some noble poor man to make her feel real, and then she gets bored with him too and comes home." He spread his hands. "I'm telling you this so you don't sit out here in the sticks eating your heart out over a woman who's already forgotten your name. You were a vacation friend, that's all. A working-class fantasy she'll tell her friends about at brunch." Caleb stood very still. And here was the terrible thing. Here was the thing that made his stomach turn. Part of him wanted to believe it. Because if it was true, then he'd been right. Then sending her away was smart, was protective, was the correct read on a woman who was always going to leave. If Dorian was telling the truth, then Caleb Ward wasn't a coward who'd thrown away the best thing in his life out of fear. He was a clear-eyed man who'd seen the con and refused to be played. Pride is a hungry thing. It'll eat any lie you feed it, as long as the lie says you were right. "Get off my property," Caleb said again. But his voice had less in it than before, and Dorian heard it, and his smile widened. "There it is," Dorian said softly. "You already believe me. You want to. Because it's easier than the alternative, isn't it? Easier than thinking you had something real and threw it away." He walked back toward his rental car. "Go on with your small life, Mr. Ward. It's the right size for you. Some men are built for empires. Some men are built for—" He gestured at the faded sign, the swept floor, the whole modest shape of it. "This. There's no shame in knowing which one you are." He got in his car and drove away, and Caleb stood in the empty lot as the dark came down, and Dorian's poison did exactly what it was designed to do. It sank in. It found the crack that was already there, the crack of a proud, frightened man who desperately wanted to have been right, and it widened it. That night, Caleb was short with Lily for the first time in years. She'd left her shoes in the hallway, and he'd tripped over them, and instead of the usual gentle reminder, he snapped, "How many times do I have to tell you to put your damn shoes away?" And the word damn hung in the air between them, and Lily's face crumpled, and Caleb hated himself instantly and completely. "Baby, Lily, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" But she was already gone up the stairs, door shut, and Caleb stood at the bottom of the steps with his hand on the rail and understood that he was becoming exactly the thing he'd been trying to protect her from. That in sending Vivian away to spare his daughter a slow heartbreak, he was giving her a slow heartbreak anyway. Just with his own 2 hands, one snapped word at a time. That the empty man he was turning into was going to hurt her worse than any billionaire ever could. He climbed the stairs, knocked on her door. "Lily, can I come in?" Nothing. He opened it anyway, gently. She was on her bed facing the wall, and on the floor beside her was a piece of paper, and Caleb's heart stopped when he saw it. It was a drawing. A crayon drawing, the kind she made by the dozen. 3 figures. A tall one with a wrench that was him, a small one with pigtails that was her, and a third one in the middle, holding both their hands, a woman with dark hair, and above her head in Lily's careful wobbling letters, one word. Family. She'd drawn it weeks ago, back when things were good. And now it was on the floor by her bed, and Caleb understood she'd been looking at it, that she took it out and looked at it, and the understanding nearly put him on his knees. "Lily," he said softly, "I want Vivian back." Her voice was muffled by the pillow. "I don't care if you don't. I want her back. She was gonna be our family and you ruined it." "Baby, you always say we do the scary thing anyway." She rolled over, and her face was red and wet and furious in the way only a child's face can be, all the way furious, no adult calculation in it. "You told me that, at the cafe. You said being brave is when you're scared, but you do the right thing anyway. And then you got scared, and you did the wrong thing. You did the coward thing." She'd never used that word before. She didn't fully know what it meant. But she knew it was the worst thing she could say, and she said it, and it landed like a bomb. "You're a coward, and I don't want to be a team with a coward." The words went through Caleb Ward like shrapnel. He sat down heavily on the edge of her bed. For a long time he didn't say anything. Then, very quietly, "You're right." Lily blinked. She'd expected a fight. Expected him to say she couldn't talk to him like that. Expected the door of adult authority to slam shut on her, the way it always did when children got too close to the truth. "I am scared," Caleb said. "You're right about that too. I'm so scared, Lily. I've been scared since the day your mom got sick. Scared of losing you. Scared of losing anybody. Scared of the whole world just taking things from us the way it took her." His voice was thick. "And when Vivian came, and I started to love her, and you started to love her, all I could think about was how much it would hurt when she left. So I made her leave first. Because if I was the one who did it, then it couldn't be done to me. Do you understand? I hurt us both so nobody else could." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "You're right. That's not brave. That's the opposite of brave. That's the most cowardly thing I've ever done. And I did it to the two people I love most in the world, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby." Lily sat up slowly. She looked at her father. Really looked the way she'd looked at Dorian in the cafe that first morning, the clear, unclouded look of a child who sees exactly what's in front of her. "Then fix it," she said simply. "You fix everything. You fix cars, and you fix the roof, and you fixed my bike. So fix it." "It's not that simple, Lil." "Why not?" "Because she's not a car. Because she's rich, baby. Really rich. She's got a whole other life a long way from here, and I don't fit in it. And she doesn't fit in mine, not really. And there's a man, a bad man, who says she does this all the time, that she gets bored of people like us and—" "Do you believe him?" The question stopped Caleb cold. Because it was the right question. It was the only question. And when he actually asked it of himself, "Do you believe Dorian Blake, that oily man with his hungry smile over the woman who folded paper cranes with your daughter and mouthed her lines from the audience and cried in your living room, that you were the only person who ever loved her for nothing?" When he actually held those two things up against each other, the answer was so obvious, it shamed him. "No," he said quietly. "No, I don't believe him." "Then why did you listen to him?" "Because he told me what I wanted to hear," Caleb admitted. "He told me I was right to be scared. And that's the most dangerous kind of lie there is. The kind that makes you feel good about the worst thing you ever did." Lily considered this with her whole serious face. Then she reached down and picked up the crayon drawing from the floor and held it out to him. "I made this for her," she said. "I was going to give it to her, but you sent her away before I could." She pushed it into his hands. "So you have to give it to her. You have to find her and give it to her, and tell her I still want her to be our family. And you have to tell her you're sorry for being a coward." Her chin came up. "And you have to be brave. For real this time. All the way brave." Caleb looked down at the drawing in his hands. 3 stick figures. 1 word. The entire architecture of a family that a frightened man had knocked down, and an 8-year-old was now patiently handing him the blueprints to rebuild. "She's in New York, Lil. That's real far. You have a truck. It's a really long way, and I don't even know if she'll want to see me. I said some things. I said she didn't belong in my world and I didn't belong in hers. I threw her out of our house. So say sorry." Lily said it with the crushing simplicity of a child for whom the entire adult apparatus of pride and class and fear simply did not exist. When I do something bad, I have to say sorry, even when it's hard. Even when I don't want to. You made me say sorry to Tommy, even when he started it. So you have to say sorry to Vivian. That's the rule. You made the rule. You made the bud. And there it was. His own rule turned back on him by the small, stern hand of justice sitting cross-legged on a twin bed. Caleb almost laughed. It came out as something closer to a sob. Yeah, he said. I did make that rule. So. He looked at the drawing again, and something in him that had been clenched shut for 11 days, for 4 years, really began slowly to open. So maybe your old man's got a long drive ahead of him. Lily's whole face changed. The fury drained out of it, and something else rushed in, something he hadn't seen there in weeks. Hope. Bright and dangerous and alive. You're gonna go get her. I'm gonna try baby. I can't promise it'll work. She might tell me to go to hell, and she'd have every right. He tucked the drawing carefully into his shirt pocket over his heart. But I'm gonna go tell her I was wrong. I'm gonna tell her I was scared and proud and stupid, and that a smarter person than me, he tapped her on the nose, about 3.5 feet tall, set me straight. And I'm gonna give her your picture, and then it's up to her. And you'll be brave. I'll be brave. He pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in 11 days, she let him. She folded into his chest the way she used to, and he felt her small arms come up around his neck and hold on. All the way brave, I promise. But even as he said it, even as he held his daughter and felt the first real warmth he'd felt since the night he'd closed that door, a cold, practical part of Caleb Ward's mind was already spinning up the problem. Because Vivian Hartwell wasn't just a woman he'd fought with. She was one of the most powerful people in the country. She lived behind walls he couldn't imagine, doorman assistants, security, a whole apparatus designed to keep exactly the wrong kind of person out. And after the way they'd parted after Dorian, after Eleanor's crisp warning call, who was to say that apparatus wouldn't have his name on a list. You don't just walk up to a billionaire's door. You don't just knock. A man like him in a truck like his with grease under his nails, he'd be turned away at the lobby if he even got that far. He'd be a joke. A security guard's afternoon story. The mechanic who thought he could walk into an empire and ask for its queen back. And there was something else. Something worse that he only let himself think about after Lily had finally fallen asleep. Really asleep, deep and easy, the way she hadn't slept in days. The way children sleep when they've handed a burden to a grown-up and trust it'll be carried. Caleb sat on the top stair in the dark and made himself think it all the way through. 11 days was a long time, long enough for Dorian to have gotten to her the way he'd gotten to Caleb. Long enough for a woman who'd been told her whole life that no one could love her for herself to have looked at the mechanic who threw her out of his house and decided he'd proved the point. Long enough for the empire to close back over her like water. What if he drove 2,000 miles and stood at that gate with a child's crayon drawing in his pocket, and she looked at him with those tired, careful eyes and said, "You were right, Caleb. We don't belong in each other's worlds. You made sure of that." What if being brave wasn't enough? He'd told Lily that being brave meant doing the scary thing anyway. He'd never told her the part he only understood now, sitting alone in the dark, that being brave didn't come with a promise it would work. That the whole terrible point of courage was that you did the scary thing without knowing how it ended. You stood up in the cafe, not knowing if the man would swing at you. You loved somebody not knowing if you'd lose them. You drove across a country to a woman who might have every reason to hate you, and you knocked and you found out. Caleb went downstairs. He got a road atlas out of the junk drawer, the paper kind his father had kept, and he spread it on the kitchen table under the light. He found their small town, a dot too small to be named. He found New York, a great sprawling thing at the other edge of the paper. And he traced the distance between them with one grease-stained finger, all those states, all those miles, all that space between a mechanic and a fortune. Then he took the crayon drawing out of his pocket and set it on the table beside the atlas. 3 stick figures. 1 word. Family. He looked at it for a long time, and the fear was still there. It would always be there. He understood that now fear wasn't something you defeated. It was something you carried. But sitting right next to the fear now was something the fear had been crowding out for 4 years. Something his daughter had handed back to him with a crayon drawing and the word coward, and the unbearable clarity of a child who refused to let him hide. The courage to stay. Or in this case, the courage to go and to fight and to stand at a gate that might not open and knock anyway. Caleb folded the road atlas closed. He carried the drawing back upstairs and set it on his own nightstand where he'd see it first thing in the morning. Then he lay down in his bed in his small house, in his small town at the end of a life he'd built to keep out exactly the kind of impossible thing that had walked into his cafe one gray morning and changed everything, and he did not sleep. But for the first time in 11 days, the not sleeping wasn't grief. It was planning. Somewhere 2,000 miles east in a life of glass and steel that had never once felt like home, Vivian Hartwell was awake too. Though Caleb couldn't know that. He couldn't know that she'd kept a single thing from those 2 weeks a photograph Lily had made, her take the three of them at the river blurry and off-center and perfect, and that she looked at it more than she'd ever admit. He couldn't know that Dorian had been to see her too with a different set of poisons, whispering that the mechanic had never called. Never written that his silence proved he'd only ever seen her as a problem to be rid of. He couldn't know that she was at that very moment closer to believing it than she'd ever been closer to letting the empire close over her for good, closer to becoming again the woman who knew better than to hope. He couldn't know any of that. All he knew was what his daughter had taught him sitting cross-legged on a twin bed with a crayon in her fist, and more courage in her small body than her father had managed in 4 years. You fix everything, Daddy. So fix it. Be brave. For real this time. All the way brave. Caleb Ward closed his eyes in the dark, and somewhere in his chest, for the first time in a very long time, the tiredest man in the county felt something that was not tiredness at all. He felt ready. He left before dawn. He'd arranged it all the night before with the efficiency of a man who'd once planned deployments. Marge would take Lily. Marge had cried when he asked, actually cried, and then smacked him on the arm and said it was about damn time. He'd packed a bag. He'd checked the truck's oil and belts and tires himself twice, because the last thing he needed was to break down in Ohio chasing a billionaire. And he'd taken the crayon drawing off his nightstand and slid it into a plastic sleeve so it wouldn't get grease on it, and set it on the passenger seat where he could see it the whole way. You call me every night, Marge told him on the porch, holding a sleepy Lily against her side. And Caleb, she gripped his arm, when you find that woman you don't lead with your pride. You lead with the truth. You hear me, the truth first. The pride can stay in the truck. The pride can stay in the truck, Caleb repeated. Lily broke away from Marge and ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. Bring her home, she whispered. I'm gonna try, baby. I'm gonna try so hard. Not try, bring her home. You promised you'd be all the way brave. He knelt down and looked his daughter in the eye. I did, and I will be. But I need you to understand something, Lily, in case it doesn't work. She might say no. She has every right to say no after what I did. And if she does, that's not because you weren't worth it, or because we did something wrong. It's because I broke something, and sometimes broken things don't go back together, no matter how hard you're brave. You understand? Lily looked at him with those steady brown eyes. She won't say no, she said with the absolute faith of a child. She loves us. You just have to remind her. And Caleb, who knew better, who knew the world, took things and didn't give them back. Who'd learned that lesson in a hospital chapel 4 years ago. Caleb chose, standing on his porch in the dark, to believe an 8-year-old instead. Because sometimes faith isn't about the odds. Sometimes faith is just the decision to drive east anyway. He drove for 2 days. He drove through the flat middle of the country with the radio on and off and on again, rehearsing what he'd say, and then throwing it out because every speech he built sounded like a man defending himself, and Marge was right. He wasn't going there to defend himself. He was going there to tell the truth. The truth didn't need a speech. The truth just needed him to stand still and say it and not run. He called Lily every night. The first night she asked where he was, and he said Missouri. And she asked if that was close, and he said not yet. The second night he said Pennsylvania, and she got excited, and he had to remind her that getting there was the easy part. And on the afternoon of the third day, Caleb Ward drove his father's truck rust on the wheel wells, 200,000 miles on the odometer, a ladder rack he'd never taken off into the heart of New York City, and understood immediately how far out of his depth he was. The Hartwell building was a tower of glass that threw the whole gray sky back at itself. Caleb parked the truck 4 blocks away because he couldn't find anything closer, and even 4 blocks away, the parking cost more than he made in a morning. He walked to the tower in his good flannel, he'd brought his good one, and his clean boots, and he felt every eye that slid over him and dismissed him, the mechanic, the out-of-towner, the man who did not belong on this street among these people. He walked into the lobby and a security guard was on him before he'd gone 10 feet. "Can I help you? I'm here to see Vivian Hartwell." The guard's expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a small tired amusement, the look of a man who fielded this kind of thing weekly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then I'm afraid I can't help you. Ms. Hartwell doesn't take walk-ins." He was already gesturing toward the door. "There's a general inquiries line you can call. Tell her Caleb Ward is here." Caleb didn't move toward the door. He planted his feet the way he'd planted them at the cafe, the calm coming down over him like it always did when things mattered. "Just tell her the name. Caleb Ward. If she says she doesn't want to see me, I'll walk out that door, and I'll never come back, and you'll never have to deal with me again. But you tell her the name first." The guard studied him. Something in Caleb's stillness, that cafe stillness, the quiet of a man who wasn't going to make a scene, but also wasn't going to be moved, must have registered, because instead of calling for backup, the guard picked up a phone. "I've got a Caleb Ward in the lobby asking for Ms. Hartwell. No appointment." A pause. "Yes, that's what he said." A longer pause. The guard's eyebrows went up slightly. "Understood." He hung up, looked at Caleb with new reassessing eyes. "Someone's coming down." It wasn't Vivian. The elevator opened, and a woman stepped out, crisp, professional, 60 or so, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Caleb's truck. And Caleb knew the voice before she opened her mouth, because he'd heard it on the phone 11 days and 2,000 miles ago. "Mr. Ward." Eleanor's smile was polished and entirely without warmth. "This is a surprise. I confess I didn't expect to see you in person. I thought our phone call had made the situation clear." "You're Eleanor. I'm Ms. Hartwell's chief of staff, yes. I've been with the family for 30 years, which means, Mr. Ward, that I've seen a great many men like you come through this lobby." She folded her hands. "Let me save you some time and some dignity. Vivian is not available. She's rebuilding her life after an ill-advised sabbatical. She's re-engaged with the board, with her responsibilities with the people who understand her world. The last thing she needs is a reminder of a difficult chapter walking into her lobby in a—" her eyes flicked over him, work shirt. Caleb absorbed it. He'd expected worse, honestly. "I'd like to see her." "That's not going to happen. With respect, ma'am, that's her decision, not yours. Everything about protecting Vivian is my decision. That's the job." Eleanor stepped closer and her voice dropped, and the polish came off it, and underneath was something harder and more honest. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Ward, since you drove all this way. I don't dislike you. I actually think you might even be sincere, which is rarer than you'd think in this building. But sincere isn't enough. You have no idea what her life is. There are people whose entire careers depend on who she marries. There are mergers, foundations, 100,000 employees, a legacy her grandfather bled for. She cannot run off to fix carburetors in a town I couldn't find on a map. And every day you keep her hoping she can is a day of real damage to a real empire and a real woman." She straightened. "So I'm asking you one more time, and this time not as a threat, but as something closer to a plea from someone who loves her differently than you do. Go home. Let her heal. Let her be who she was born to be. If you love her, you'll let her go." And that was the poison that nearly worked. Because it wasn't Dorian's ugly lie. It was worse. It was a truth-shaped thing wrapped in what sounded like love, and it hit the exact spot Caleb was most afraid of. What if the kindest thing really was to leave? What if he was being selfish? What if he'd driven 2,000 miles not to save Vivian, but to save his own broken heart, and the price was dragging her out of a life she was built for? He stood there in the lobby of glass and steel, and he felt his resolve waver, and his hand went to his shirt pocket. An old nervous habit now, and he felt the plastic sleeve and the crayon drawing inside it. 3 stick figures, 1 word. And Caleb remembered his daughter's face. Not try. Bring her home. Ma'am, he said quietly, you keep telling me what her life is, what her world needs, what she was born to be. And maybe you're right about all of it. You've known her 30 years, and I've known her a few weeks, so maybe you know things I don't. He pulled the drawing out of his pocket still in its sleeve and held it up so she could see it. But my daughter drew this 3 weeks ago. That's me, that's her, and that's Vivian in the middle holding both our hands. And that word up top, that's my 8-year-old's spelling of family. His voice was steady, but it cost him. Now I don't know much about mergers or boards or legacies. But I know my little girl who lost her mother at 4 and never once called anybody else that word, looked at a woman she'd known 2 weeks and drew her into the middle of our family in crayon. And I don't think you do that for a person who's just born to be a fortune. I think you do that for a person. A real one. He lowered the drawing. So I'm not going to tell Vivian what her life should be. That's not why I drove here. I drove here to give her this, and to say I'm sorry for being a coward, and then to let her choose. Not you, not the board. Her. Because in 2 weeks in a town you can't find on a map she was more free to choose than she's probably been her whole life. And I think somewhere in her she knows that. Eleanor stared at him. And something moved in her polished face, some crack, some flicker of a woman who had in fact watched Vivian Hartwell grow from a lonely little girl into a lonely powerful woman, and who maybe underneath 30 years of duty wanted for her the one thing all the money never bought. That's very moving, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its certainty. It's not supposed to be moving, it's just true. For a long moment Eleanor said nothing, then she reached out. May I see it? Caleb hesitated, then handed her the drawing. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. At the 3 stick figures, at the wobbling crayon letters. And Caleb watched 30 years of gatekeeping war with something older and softer, and he couldn't tell which was going to win. She's engaged, Eleanor said abruptly, still looking at the drawing. Did you know that it was announced 4 days ago, to Dorian Blake? A merger, really his family's holdings with ours. Her mother arranged it. Vivian agreed to it the day after she came back from your town. Eleanor finally looked up, and her eyes were harder to read now. She agreed to it, Mr. Ward, because she'd decided that the thing she wanted couldn't be had. That a man in a small town had looked at who she really was and thrown her out of his house. She decided love wasn't for her after all, so she went back to the merger, to the safe, sensible, loveless thing, because that's what people in this world do when they've given up. She handed the drawing back. You want to know if you're too late? That's the real question, isn't it? Not whether she'll see you. Whether it matters if she does. The floor dropped out of Caleb's stomach. Dorian Blake. Engaged. The oily man from the cafe, the man who'd driven all the way to his shop to poison him, the man who'd claimed Vivian got bored of people like Caleb, and the whole time he'd been arranging to own her. That man doesn't love her, Caleb said, and his voice had gone low and dangerous, the cafe voice. Love was never the point of it. He grabbed her wrist in a cafe hard enough to leave marks. That's the first time I ever saw either of them. He put his hands on her, and she went somewhere behind her own eyes the way people do when fighting never worked. Caleb's jaw was tight. You've known her 30 years, ma'am. You love her, you said differently than I do. So tell me the truth. Is she happy? In this merger, is she happy? Eleanor didn't answer, and her not answering was the loudest thing in that lobby of glass. That's what I thought, Caleb said quietly. Eleanor looked at him a long moment longer, and then something in her, the thing that had against every professional instinct asked to see a child's crayon drawing, made its decision. There's a gala tonight, she said. The Hartwell Foundation's annual benefit. Vivian will be there. So will Dorian. So will 300 of the most important people in this city and the press, and her mother, who would sooner see the building burn than see her daughter embarrassed by a mechanic from nowhere. She pulled a card from her jacket, wrote something on the back. This is the address, and this is a name at the door that will get you in. I'm not doing this because I think you belong there, Mr. Ward. You don't. You'll be the most out-of-place man in the room by a mile. She pressed the card into his hand, and for just a second, her polished mask was all the way gone, and underneath was a tired woman who'd spent 30 years loving a girl who was never allowed to be happy. I'm doing it because in 30 years, no one has ever shown me a picture like that one. And because you asked if she was happy, and I couldn't answer, and that answer has bothered me for 4 days. Go home and change into whatever's your best. It won't be enough. Come anyway. And she turned and walked back to the elevator, and Caleb Ward stood in the lobby of the Hartwell Tower with a card in one hand and a crayon drawing in the other, and the whole impossible size of what he was about to do settling over him. He had one evening. He had one flannel shirt and a suit jacket that had been his father's. He had a child's drawing and a 2,000-mile apology, and no earthly business walking into a room full of the most powerful people in the country to interrupt an engagement. He went and got a haircut. He bought a white dress shirt from a store where the cheapest one made him wince. He shined his boots in the truck with a rag and spit like his old man taught him. And at 7 o'clock, Caleb Ward walked up to a hotel ballroom that cost more to rent for one night than his house was worth, gave the name Eleanor had written on the card, and watched the man at the door frown, check a list, frown deeper, and then reluctantly wave him through. The room hit him like a wall. 300 people in clothes that cost fortunes, chandeliers a string quartet, waiters gliding with trays of things he couldn't name. And Caleb in his father's jacket and his new shirt and his spit-shined boots felt every single person notice him and file him instantly as wrong the help maybe, or someone's driver who'd wandered in, certainly not one of them. He didn't care. He was scanning the room the way he'd scanned the cafe. And he found her. Vivian stood near the front, near a small stage in a gown the color of deep water, and she was beautiful and she was miserable. Caleb could see it from across the room, the composure he knew so well, the billionaire's armor, and underneath it, the woman who'd cried in his living room, packed away so tight she looked like she might crack. Beside her stood Dorian Blake in a tuxedo, one hand resting on the small of her back, with the casual ownership of a man displaying a possession. And beside them, an older woman, silver and sharp, and unmistakably her mother. And as Caleb watched, Dorian took a glass and a small spoon and tapped it, and the room began to hush, and Caleb understood with a lurch that he was about to watch the engagement made official in front of 300 people, and that he had maybe 90 seconds to decide whether he was the man his daughter thought he was. "If I could have everyone's attention," Dorian was saying, his voice smooth and carrying. "Thank you all. Tonight is a special night for the Hartwell family and for mine. Many of you know that our two families have been friends and partners for a very long time. And tonight I'm honored to share that that partnership is becoming something more permanent." He turned to Vivian, took her hand. "Vivian, Vivian." Caleb didn't shout it. He said it the way he said everything that mattered quiet level, and somehow it cut straight through the room the way his stillness always did. And 300 heads turned toward the man in the borrowed jacket, standing at the back of the ballroom, and the string quartet faltered, and Dorian's smooth face went slack with disbelief, and then dark with fury. And Vivian Hartwell looked across a room full of the most powerful people in the country, and saw the mechanic who'd thrown her out of his house standing there with something in his hand. The silence was total. "You," Dorian said. And his composure was gone, all of it. The cafe was in his voice now. "You have got to be out of your mind. Security." "I just want a minute," Caleb said to the room, to her not moving. "I drove 2,000 miles for 1 minute. Then I'll go if she wants me to." "You'll go now." Dorian took a step. "You have no idea what you've walked into. You're going to be escorted out of here, and if you're lucky, that's all that happens." Dorian. Vivian's voice. Quiet, but it stopped him cold. She was staring at Caleb, and her armor was cracking in real time right there in front of everyone. And her mother put a hand on her arm and hissed something, and Vivian didn't even hear it. Let him talk. Vivian, there are 300 people. I said let him talk. She stepped away from Dorian's hand, away from her mother, and the whole room watched one of the most powerful women in the country walk a few steps toward a mechanic in a borrowed jacket, and the press near the stage began quietly to raise their phones. Caleb, what are you doing here? And Caleb Ward, standing in the most intimidating room he'd ever been in, more scared than he'd been in 12 countries, felt the fear come up and felt himself do the thing his daughter had taught him. He did it anyway, all the way. I came to say I'm sorry, he said. And his voice carried because he let it, because he wasn't hiding anymore. I came to say I was a coward. You told me the truth about who you were, and instead of hearing it, I got scared, and I threw you out of my house, and I told you that you didn't belong in my world, and I didn't belong in yours. And I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it. He took a step toward her. You didn't lie to me about who you were, Vivian. You showed me exactly who you were every single day in my garage and at my table and at my daughter's school play. The name was the only thing that was different. The woman was real. I knew she was real. I threw her out anyway because I was too scared of losing her to just keep her. And that's the worst thing I've ever done. You're too late. Dorian's voice tight. She's made her choice. We're engaged. Tell him, Vivian. Tell him it's over. But Vivian wasn't looking at Dorian. She was looking at the thing in Caleb's hand. What is that? She said. Caleb held it up, the crayon drawing in its plastic sleeve. Lily made it, weeks ago, before everything. He crossed the last of the distance between them, ignoring Dorian entirely, ignoring the mother, ignoring 300 of the most important people in the country, and he held it out to the only person in the room who mattered. That's me, that's her, and that's you in the middle holding both our hands. And that word up top, she wrote that herself. That's how an 8-year-old spells family. Vivian took it with a hand that had begun to shake. She hasn't been the same since you left, Caleb said softer now, just for her. She stopped narrating her horse books. She stopped asking for the good hot chocolate. She set the table for 2 and made a point of it so I'd see the exact size of the family I threw away. And then one night, she looked at me and she called me a coward, my 8-year-old, and she was right. And she said, "You fix everything, Daddy, so fix it." And she made me promise to be all the way brave, and to drive here, and to give you this, and to tell you she still wants you to be our family. His voice broke finally in front of everyone, and he let it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm being all the way brave, for the first time in 4 years. I'm standing in the scariest room I've ever been in my dead father's jacket in front of everybody, to tell you that I don't care that you're rich, and I don't care about your empire, and I don't care about any of it. I care that my daughter drew you into the middle of us in crayon, and she was right, and I was too much of a coward to see it. He stopped an arm's length from her. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm not Eleanor. I'm not going to tell you what your life should be. I'm just asking, is there room anywhere in that whole big life of yours for a mechanic and his little girl who love you? Because if there is, we'll figure out the rest. And if there isn't, I'll get in my truck and drive home, and I'll never bother you again. But I couldn't let you marry a man who grabbed your wrist in a cafe without at least telling you the truth. You deserve to make the choice knowing somebody drove 2,000 miles just to be honest with you. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice settling in 300 glasses. Vivian Hartwell stood in her deep water gown with a child's crayon drawing shaking in her hands, and she looked at it, and she looked at the man in the borrowed jacket, and something that had been locked up tight in her for a very long time, longer than 11 days, longer than the 2 years since her father died. Maybe her whole guarded life began finally to break open, and Dorian Blake, watching his merger evaporate in real time in front of the entire New York press, made the single worst decision of his evening. He grabbed her arm. Vivian, enough. You are embarrassing yourself and your family and 30 years of Take your hand off her." Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It was the cafe all over again, the exact same words, the exact same quiet that was more frightening than any shout, and the whole room felt the temperature drop. "I watched you do that the first time we ever met. I stood up then when I didn't know her name and didn't know yours and had nothing to gain. You think I won't do it now?" Dorian's hand didn't move. His eyes flicked around the room, the press, the cameras, the 300 witnesses, and Caleb watched him do the math, the same wrong math from the cafe, weighing his pride against the mechanic's stillness. "Dorian," Vivian said very quietly, not looking at him, still looking at the drawing. "Let go of my arm." A breath. "You've been letting go of my arm your whole life a beat too late. And I've been letting you. But not tonight. Not in front of him." She finally lifted her eyes, and they were wet, and they were certain, and they were free in a way Caleb hadn't seen since the river. "Let go. The engagement is off. It was always a merger, and I'm done being merged." And she pulled her arm free and turned her back on Dorian Blake and her mother and the Empire, and 300 of the most powerful people in the country. And she looked at Caleb Ward with a child's crayon drawing pressed against her heart, and for the first time in that whole glittering, terrible room, Vivian Hartwell looked like a person. "You drove 2,000 miles, she said, to give me a picture." "To give you the truth," Caleb said. The picture was just the proof. And whatever she said next, whatever choice she was about to make in front of everyone she'd ever known, the whole room leaned in to hear it, because they had all just watched a mechanic in a borrowed jacket do the one thing none of their money had ever taught them how to do, and not a single person in that ballroom could look away. What she said next, she said quietly, but the whole room heard it. "I need to make a phone call." It wasn't what anyone expected. Not Caleb, not Dorian, not the 300 people holding their breath. Vivian Hartwell reached into a small clutch, pulled out her phone, and with the crayon drawing still pressed to her chest, she dialed a number she apparently knew by heart. And she put it on speaker, and she held it up, and into the silence of that enormous ballroom, a small, sleepy voice came through the tiny speaker, and Caleb's heart stopped. "Hello, Lily." It was Lily. Vivian had her number. Of course she did. She'd known their whole schedule, and Caleb realized with a lurch that some part of Vivian had kept it all this time. "Lily," Vivian said, and her voice cracked on the single word. "It's me. It's Vivian." There was a silence on the line, and then a sound that broke every heart in that room, a small, sharp intake of breath, and then, "Vivian, Vivian, Daddy went to find you. Did he find you? Is he there? Did he give you my picture? Did he say sorry for being a coward?" 300 of the most powerful people in the country listened to an 8-year-old lay the whole thing bare, and not one of them was breathing. "He found me," Vivian said, tears running freely now, not caring, not armored, just a woman on a phone in a ballroom. "He's standing right in front of me, and he gave me your picture, honey, the one with the 3 of us. It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. Do you like it?" "I love it. I've been carrying you in my heart this whole time, and now I get to carry it in my hands too. Are you going to be our family now?" Lily's voice was fierce and hopeful, and completely without guile. The voice of a child who did not know or care that she was being broadcast to a room full of billionaires. "Daddy was so sad without you. He got the 2 kinds of ice cream, and then he cried in the kitchen, and he thought I didn't hear, but I heard. And I told him he had to be brave and go get you, 'cause you were going to be our family, and he ruined it. Did he unruin it? Are you coming home?" Vivian looked up from the phone, looked at Caleb standing there in his dead father's jacket with tears in his own eyes, now this hard-broken man undone completely in front of everyone. "That depends on your daddy," Vivian said into the phone, still looking at Caleb. "What did he say when he got here? I don't know, I'm not there." A watery laugh went through the room, the first crack in the tension. 300 people surprising themselves. He said, "Vivian told her that he doesn't care that I'm rich, and he doesn't care about my empire, and he came 2,000 miles just to be honest with me. He said the only thing he cares about is that you drew me into the middle of your family in crayon, and that he was too scared to see you were right. I told him that I said that exact thing. Lily's triumph crackled through the speaker. So does that mean yes? Are you coming home? Please come home, Vivian. Please. I set the table for 2 and it's too small. I want it to be 3. And that the table set for 2, that a little girl wanted to be 3, that was the thing that finished it. Vivian Hartwell closed her eyes and a sound came out of her that was half sob and half laugh, and when she opened them she was done. All the way done with the armor, the merger, the empire, the whole loveless, sensible life she'd resigned herself to 11 days ago. Yes, she said into the phone, and her voice was steady now, certain free. Yes, honey, I'm coming home. Tell the table to make room for 3. The scream of joy that came through that tiny speaker was so loud and so pure that people laughed and wiped their eyes all across the ballroom strangers. Hard people softened for one moment by an 8-year-old's happiness broadcast at full volume. I have to go, sweetheart, Vivian managed. I have to talk to your daddy, but I'll see you very soon. I promise. And Lily, thank you for being brave enough for all of us. Bye, Vivian. Bye, tell Daddy he's not a coward anymore. The line clicked off, and Vivian Hartwell stood in the middle of the Hartwell Foundation Gala in front of the board and the press and her mother and the man she'd almost married, and she turned to face all of it. I imagine, she said, and her voice had found its full strength again, but it was a different strength now, not armor, but bedrock. That a number of you have questions, so let me save you the trouble. She turned to Dorian. There will be no engagement. There was never going to be a marriage, only a transaction, and I'm done being a line item in my own life. She turned to her mother. Mother, I love you, and I know you did what you thought was right, but you spent 30 years teaching me that no one could ever love me for myself, and tonight a mechanic drove 2,000 miles to prove you wrong in front of everyone you know. So I'm going to choose to believe him instead of you. Just this once. Her mother's face was white. Vivian, if you walk out of here with that man, you understand what it means. The board, the company, everything your grandfather, I understand exactly what it means. And here Vivian's voice didn't waver at all. It means I'll be free. Do you know I've been trying to give away control of that company for a year? The board would love nothing more. They think I'm reckless, sentimental. They're probably right. A small, fierce smile. I'll keep the foundation, the part that actually helps people, and I'll sign the rest over to people who want it more than I ever did. And I'll go live in a town none of you can find on a map with a man who loved me before he knew what I was worth, and a little girl who drew me into her family in crayon. And I will be happier than this room has ever seen a Hartwell be. She looked around at all of them 300 faces. You can call it throwing my life away. I call it finally picking it up. And then she walked across the ballroom, past the quartet, past the waiters, past 300 of the most powerful people in the country, straight to Caleb Ward. And she stopped in front of him close enough to smell the new dress shirt and the shoe polish and everything he'd done to be worthy of a room he didn't belong in. You came, she said. I came. You were a coward, and then you drove 2,000 miles and stood in front of everyone I know in your father's jacket. I did. Why? And Caleb Ward looked at her, and he didn't reach for a speech because Marge was right. The truth didn't need one. Because you were the first thing in 4 years that made me want to stop just surviving, he said. Because my daughter's right about people she always has been, and she picked you. And because I finally figured out that I wasn't protecting Lily from heartbreak by sending you away. I was just teaching her to run. And I'll be damned if I raise that little girl to be as scared as her old man. His voice dropped just for her. I don't have anything, Vivian. A truck. A garage with another man's name on it. A house that needs a new roof. That's it. That's the whole offer. But it comes with 2 people who'll love you for exactly nothing for the rest of our lives. And I've got a feeling that's the one thing all of this, he glanced around the glittering room, could never buy you. No, Vivian said softly. It couldn't. God knows it tried. So, and Vivian Hartwell, who owned half the country, who could have bought that small town with a phone call, looked at the mechanic who was offering her a leaky roof and 2 hearts, and she made the only choice that had ever made her happy. "Take me home, Caleb Ward," she said. "Take me home to that table that's too small." He did. They didn't drive back that night. It was 2,000 miles, and Caleb had been awake for what felt like a week, but they left the gala together, walked out of that ballroom side by side while 300 people watched, and the cameras flashed, and Dorian Blake stood alone by the stage with his ruined merger. And in the morning, it would be in every paper in the country, the Hartwell heiress and the small-town mechanic, but neither of them cared. They walked out into the New York night, and Caleb led her to his rusted truck 4 blocks away, and Vivian Hartwell, in her deep-water gown, climbed into the passenger seat where the crayon drawing had ridden the whole way east, and she held it in her lap, the whole drive to the cheap hotel, and she cried, and she laughed, and she was free. They drove home over 3 days, and it was, Caleb would say later, the best road trip of his life. They talked, the whole way, really talked, no walls, now none left. She told him about her father who'd loved her and used her in equal measure. About the loneliness of never knowing if a smile was for her or her money. About the ski instructor and the painter Dorian had mentioned, who'd both turned out to want exactly what everyone wanted, and how each one had taught her to trust a little less until she'd almost forgotten how. And Caleb told her about Sarah, all of it, the hospital chapel, and the prayer that never got answered, and the 4 years of building walls. They gave each other the whole truth, finally the way they should have from the start. And by the time they crossed into their own state, the last of the distance between them was gone. Lily was waiting on the porch with Marge when the truck pulled into the drive. She'd been waiting, Marge said, for 6 hours, wouldn't come in, wouldn't eat, just sat on the top step in her coat watching the road. And when she saw Vivian step out of that truck, Lily Ward flew off that porch and across the yard so fast she was a blur, and she hit Vivian at full speed and wrapped her whole small body around her, and Vivian caught her and dropped to her knees in the gravel in her traveling clothes and held on. And the 2 of them stayed like that a long time. The billionaire and the motherless girl. Both of them crying, both of them finally home. "You came back," Lily sobbed into her shoulder. "You came back, you came back." "I came back," Vivian whispered. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again. Do you hear me? Your daddy and I made the table too small on purpose, so you'd have to keep us both." Lily pulled back and looked at her with those serious brown eyes, checking, making sure the way she'd checked everything since she was 4. "Forever, forever," Vivian said. "As long as you'll have me." "That's forever," Lily informed her. "That's the same thing." And Caleb Ward stood in the gravel driveway of the small house with the roof that needed fixing, and he watched his daughter and the woman he loved holding on to each other like they'd never let go, and Marge on the porch openly weeping into her apron, and he understood that his father's prayer, the one he'd given up on in a hospital chapel 4 years ago, it hadn't gone unanswered. It had just taken the long way around. It had come back to him as a woman in a gray coat with fingerprints on her wrist in a cafe on an ordinary morning, in the exact moment his daughter said, "That man is being mean." They were married this next spring in the backyard, under the tree Lily climbed. It was small. Marge made the cake. Half the town came because Caleb Ward had fixed half the town's cars over the years, and they loved him, and they came to see the tiredest man in the county finally happy. Vivian wore a simple dress and no jewelry, and looked more radiant than she ever had in any gown at any gala. Lily was the flower girl, and she took the job with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice, and she cried, and she didn't care who saw. Vivian did sign the company away most of it. She kept the foundation, and she ran it from a little office over the garage Ward and Son Auto. The sign still unchanged, because when Caleb finally offered to repaint it to add her name, she said, "No. Leave it. Some things are perfect the way they are." She gave away more money in those first 2 years than her father had given in 20, and she said it was the first time being rich had ever felt like anything but a cage. The board was relieved to see her go. Her mother did not come to the wedding, but she came the following Christmas, and she held her granddaughter, because that's what Lily was now, and something in the old woman's iron face cracked just a little, and it was a start. Dorian Blake. They heard married someone else's fortune within the year. Caleb never thought about him again, except once when he was under a car, and the memory of those manicured fingers on Vivian's wrist floated up, and he found he felt nothing but a distant, tired pity for a man who had spent his whole life grabbing at people and never once been able to hold on to a single one. As for Caleb, he kept fixing cars. Vivian had money enough that he never needed to work another day in his life, and she told him so, and he thought about it for exactly 4 seconds before he said no. "A man's got to have something that's his," he said. "Something he does with his hands that's honest. The garage is mine. It was my dad's, and it'll be mine till I can't lift a wrench, and maybe someday it'll be hers." He nodded toward the house where Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table, the table set for 3, now always 3, sometimes 4 when Marge came. "She likes engines, says they make sense, wonder where she gets that." They had hard days, of course. All real things do. Vivian had nightmares sometimes about the old life, about being wanted for the wrong reasons, and on those nights, Caleb would hold her in the dark and remind her quietly, the way he reminded Lily about the math test stomach aches. It gets better, you just have to survive the night. And Caleb still had his own ghosts. Still had mornings when the weight of everything he'd lost sat on his chest. And on those mornings, Vivian would make the terrible garage coffee, just the way he liked it, and sit with him in the quiet and not push, because she'd learned from him that the not pushing was its own kind of love. But mostly they were happy. Mostly it was ordinary, and the ordinary was the whole miracle: the school plays and the skinned knees and the 2 kinds of ice cream in the freezer, always 2 mint and chocolate forever now. The walks to the river where Lily finally learned to skip a stone at 9 years old and shrieked so loud with pride that geese took off from the far bank, and Caleb and Vivian stood on the shore holding hands and watched their daughter conquer the one thing that had bested her. And it felt, Caleb thought, like the richest moment of his entire life, richer than anything in any tower of glass. Because here is the thing. Caleb Ward finally understood. The thing it took him 35 years and 1 broken heart and 1 terrible, cowardly mistake to learn. He'd spent 4 years believing that love was a thing the world gave you and then took away, that the only defense was to want nothing, need no one, build the walls high and keep the life small. He'd believed that a man protected the people he loved by refusing to love anyone new, by teaching his daughter to expect loss so it couldn't surprise her. He'd been wrong about every bit of it. Love wasn't the thing that got taken. Love was the thing that stayed when you were brave enough to let it. It didn't ask for perfect conditions. It didn't wait until you had money enough or courage enough, or until the ghosts were gone and the walls came down easy. It walked into your cafe on an ordinary morning wearing a gray coat, and it held your daughter's hand at the river, and it drew you into the middle of a family in crayon, and all it ever asked, the only thing it ever asked, was that you have the guts to stay. Vivian Hartwell had walked away from an empire to sit at a table that was too small, and she never once regretted it, not for a single day. And Caleb Ward, the broken warrior who once knelt in a hospital chapel and swore he'd never wait on a miracle again, learned that the miracle had been waiting on him the whole time, waiting for him to stand up in a cafe for a stranger, and then much harder to drive 2,000 miles and stand up for her again, and finally, hardest of all, to simply stop running and stay. Years later, when Lily was grown and someone asked her how her parents met, she'd smile and say her dad stood up for a woman in a cafe, not knowing she was a billionaire, and that the money never mattered, not for 1 second, in either direction. What mattered, she'd say, was that a scared man learned to be brave, and a lonely woman learned to be seen, and a little girl with a box of crayons drew the 3 of them into a family before any of the grown-ups were smart enough to know it was true. Caleb Ward once believed he had nothing left to give and nothing left to lose. He was wrong on both counts. He had everything that mattered, and it had been within his reach the entire time. He only had to find the courage to close his hand around it and hold on, and hold on. He did for the rest of his life, to a woman who chose him over the world, and a daughter who was braver than them both, at a small table set for 3, in a small house with a name on the garage that never changed. Because some things, once you finally get them right, are perfect, exactly the way they are.